And oftentimes we get caught up in this idea of peak performance. I know when I started this work, people were always talking about peak performance and how do they peak here, peak there, peak everywhere. People were often asking me or telling me, hey, you Navy SEALs, you're the ultimate peak performers. And I would disagree with that statement. The reason why is because peak by definition is an apex. There's only one place you can go from an apex, and that's downward, right? So the other thing about peak is peak often has to be planned for, scheduled, and prepared for. So in other words, the pro football player plans and schedules his entire week so that he can peak for 3 hours on Sunday. Well, we don't get to do that. Navy SEALs don't get to do that. None of us regular human beings get to do that. We have to actually perform with what we've got in the moment. So I used to say we're in fact optimal performers. Optimal performance means I'm going to do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in the moment. All right. So sometimes our best in the moment looks like peak and everything's clicking and it's flow states and groovy and cool. However, sometimes our best in the moment is I am literally head down, nugging it out, slogging it out, and it's dirty and it's gritty and it's ugly and it's hard. And that is still performing optimally. And so optimal performance allows us a couple of really important things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we are not at peak, because we can't be at peak all the time. The other thing it allows us to do is responsible energy management. In other words, I don't have to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I could be modulating my energy to whatever degree I need. And I often say, we'd sometimes be in the helicopters flying into combat, right? And the guys around me would be sleeping. They'd be napping. And there's a reason for that. It's because we don't know what's coming. We don't know what energy, how long we're going to be out there, what's going to be required energetically. We're not going to waste an ounce of our energy doing things we don't need to do. So the first idea is to think that optimal performance is this umbrella underneath which peak lives and gutting it out lives and even recovery lives. All this to say is when we're talking about performance and elite performance, I think elite performance or high performing teams or individuals is not really just defined as doing things great when things are going great. High performing teams, they perform when things aren't going great, when what hits the fan, as do high performing humans. And so to start to examine and explore performance at those levels, when the what is hitting the fan, when we're at our most raw, we must take a deeper look into those things, those elements about ourselves that we bring into the equation. And that was really the impetus of the whole attributes concept.
I'm sitting here thinking of all the people we've worked with. I'm like, is the more important question the how or the why?
I think if we want to get better, the more important is the how. If we want to understand I think inspiration comes from why. I think performance comes from how.
So we need to spend. You'd make an argument we need to spend way more time in the how.
Well, I think yes. No, I wouldn't say way more time. It's a great question. I think what the why does for us is it allows context often. But I think why and how often become interrelated in terms of, if this is why something's happening, it usually starts to bleed into the hows, because again, if we know how, we can repeat it. You can't necessarily repeat it if you just know why. So I think both are important, because one provides inspiration and direction, the other provides instruction and kind of and a roadmap, if you will.
These 25 attributes, the hidden drivers of optimal performance that was in the book Attributes, did you already kind of have those documented, maybe in the final journey that you were in the Navy, where you helped, I don't know if the right word is train and develop these SEALs? Did you start to document them as you went through the process, or did you kind of know them as you went to write the book?
Yeah, it's a great one. So I got bad news for you in terms of timing. We have 41 attributes now. It's not just 25. But the impetus of those, and even when I was writing the book, I knew there were more than 25. I just, you can't pitch a 900-page book to a publisher. They don't like those things. So I wanted to focus in on what I thought the most important ones were. In the Navy, when I did the work, what we did was we attempted to determine what the attributes were that we were looking for specifically for the SEALs we were doing assessment and selection on. We came up back at that time with 36 attributes, and I brought those 36 attributes with me and had them in front of me as I began to put together the book. The thing is, when I began to really make some more direct and precise distinctions about attributes and skills, what I recognized is some of those 36 were in fact skills. They weren't attributes. And those 36 weren't really appropriately defined. And so I used the list of the 36 as kind of a baseline, and then began to build the list for the book from that. But as in any book project, things change. I think when I first started the book, the first pitch of the book was 36 attributes, and then as I began writing it, and we kind of refined and modified, I think it went down to 28, and it went to 29, and then we ended up on maybe we're at 22 at some point. We ended up at 25. But again, right now we're at 41, and I think we're always open to the idea, the fact that there may be more. There's also possibilities that there, maybe a couple of the 41 could be downgraded, but the list has matured and evolved throughout the time frame.
My brain goes to so many questions around the 22 and 25 and 36. So there's this idea out here in the world with companies, because you're out here engaging in probably in governmental entities, but then going out in private companies and speaking and consulting. There's this idea that, do you find talent or do you develop it?
Yeah.
So it seemed like what you're speaking to here, you needed to find them to become SEALs.
Yeah, so I think that again, what I would define talent it's a combination, it's a synchronization between attributes and skills, right? And so I think in any endeavor, you are looking for a little bit of both. However, I would argue that that talent, for the most part, can come from attributes first, because we all know, and we all have examples, and I have examples in the SEAL teams where the environment, the culture exploded the skill. In fact, it brought up the skill. So you put someone with the right attribute set, who's a culture fit, into the right environment, that person's skills, their overall skill, their overall performance accelerates a great deal. Same deal. You put someone who has a bunch of skills into the wrong culture, wrong environment, and you'll see performance often go down. So I think what we have to do as teams and organizations is first understand what about the culture makes it so. That's usually a combination of attributes that they prioritize, values, things like that, and then begin to look for cultural fits who have the qualities that will really accelerate. You can do this to any degree you want. I would imagine that, for example, Navy SEALs, for example, for basic SEAL training, you don't have to know anything going to basic SEAL training. I never shot a weapon in my life before I went to the Navy. There are guys who showed up to SEAL training who'd never seen the ocean before, right? And by the end of SEAL training, they're scuba diving, right? So the philosophy in the SEAL environment is, I don't care what skills you have. You could have nothing. We will teach you. As long as you have the attributes, we'll teach you. Obviously, not necessarily the case in all endeavors. There are many positions or teams where there's some prerequisites required. You wouldn't want to hire a CFO who never had any accounting experience, right? But holistically, I think what businesses and teams get wrong is they deprioritize attributes too often, and they prioritize skills too often. So they put these visible things we can see, measure, and test at the forefront, and that's not necessarily telling us if someone is going to be a good fit, or in fact can do the job when the what hits the fan.
It seems like we're sitting here talking about like an ability and a willingness to learn.
Anything. That's part of it. I mean, because and learnability is an attribute, humility is an attribute, curiosity and open-mindedness are all attributes. But I think every skill is buttressed by whatever attributes allow for that skill to happen. So I think the willingness to learn is certainly a part of an environment, but even a willingness to learn. I mean, if we're the way I like to describe us in terms of attributes is we're all automobiles, okay? But all of us are different types. So some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Ferraris, and there's no judgment there, because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it behooves us to figure out what kind of car we are, because the friction in our lives might be because we've been in a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track this whole time, or vice versa. And so even absent a predominant quote willingness to learn, if you find out and can get right what kind of vehicle you are and get yourself on the right track, the rest is going to just take care of itself.
Did you develop that metaphor building SEAL teams?
I wish I could say I did. I think I developed the metaphor when I wrote the book, and I think the reason is because SEAL teams is a very distinct environment. We have a very distinct thing we're looking for. And I don't know what kind of car that is, but we're all in many ways the same version of the vehicle. We just bring to a different thing. But certainly, while writing the book, we start to look at and you start to work with a whole diverse scope of different professions and niches, if you will.